What's up, everybody? It's your commissioner here speaking. Today, I'm here talking about some tips for you guys for the season, and they're going to be a little vague, but I think guys can all take some stuff from some of the things I have to say. Last year, I made a video more about some draft day tips, but I thought this video would be a little bit more valuable considering that you could use it, as I just mentioned, for the whole year. So this is basically just all my ramblings, kind of trying to make it more succinct and a more concise video, and I hope you guys enjoy. These points will be in no order really. And if you guys have any questions, you can always text me or comment. These are always fun to make. I probably should have shaved and waited to like the next day for better lighting, but it is what it is. Starting off with the first point, I think we need to talk about bias and how it affects almost all of us. This isn't necessarily bias concerning other teams and like, if you like the Packers, then I'm going to be biased more towards the performance of Packers players. This is more of just how you feel towards your players compared to others and how you might be biased towards some performances more than others. What I mean by this, some examples. If your first round pick is doing well, it's all good. If somebody else's first round pick or second round picks doing poorly the first couple weeks, I feel like I hear people start saying and they're a bust. If your late round pick hits and is doing well the first couple weeks, he's a league winner. Why would you trade him? You're a genius. But if somebody else's late round pick hits and is doing well, it's like, well, that won't last. Like he got lucky with that pick, yada, yada, yada. The same goes with waiver wire targets. I feel like when I see somebody else have a waiver wire guy and now and he hits and they want to get rid of him because they have all these other running backs, I feel like a lot of other people are just like, yeah, he's just trying to sell high and that person's not going to keep it up. But when you have that waiver wire player and he's going off for you and you don't need him on your team, you just need him for 1 week and now he's doing well, and you're like, why isn't anybody coming for this player? It kind of just shows that there's this obvious bias, and I think it affects all of us. And it's tough being honest with yourself in fantasy because everyone wants to think that they know more than others and that you're making the right picks. These are your players. Sometimes there is emotion to that, making a pick and not everyone thought it was going to be a great pick, or it was like a sleeper pick and it hits. But you need to be able to recognize and just know that whether he's on your team or on the other player's team, you still need to look in the numbers. Or players can be a bust on your team or on their team, and players can have hot streaks and then bust or just disappear on anybody's team. So just because a bad manager or a manager with a bad league history, he can still draft a league winner. That's kind of what I'm saying. And going on to the next point, and this is kind of touching off my previous point, is variance and how just not either understanding or recognizing variance. Player performances, you can really kind of put them in as like data points, depending on their weeks. If a player has been a low, like late wide receiver two, so for like the last 5 years, they've been like a top 20 wide receiver. And in their sixth season now, so they're not a rookie. They've been on the same team, same coordinator, same everything. Nothing's really changed. The first month they're wide receiver five. There's a chance that it's just so happens that the first couple weeks of the season, this is where they're having their boom weeks. But I feel like, again, going to the bias thing, is I'll see these types of players on people's teams and I'm like, yo, you gonna sell high? And like, nah, dude, like this is his year. And sure, sometimes it is their year, but a lot of the times a player after a certain amount of years, there's obviously always going to be outliers, but at a certain point, a player is who he is. If the coordinator hasn't changed and there hasn't been any significant changes to the roster, any significant, like maybe the offensive line improved and now the quarterback has more time to throw to him, whatever it may be, most of the time it's variance. We all would wish a player to be consistent, but sometimes, like if a player is a wide receiver 20, his points each year can change. Whereas, at the end of the year, he might be terrible, and then at the beginning of the year he was amazing, instead of just it all being evenly spaced out. I hope I'm not confusing people too much with that. But yeah, if you can just understand that, if a player, this makes selling high and buying low a lot easier. Like a player like CeeDee Lamb. Did I think CeeDee Lamb was going to do what he did last year? No. But did I think he was going to be a better wide receiver than I don't really remember. I think he was outside of the top 10 when I traded for him. Sure. So I'll just take my chance. And you're going to get burned on that every once in a while, 100%. An example is last year. I was considering buying into T. Higgins, and I was just like, he was getting banged up. He's having a bad season. I had him on my championship winning team last year. I know he's talented, and if I had done that, ooh, that would have been bad. Even buying low, that would have been a bad buy because sometimes it's just not a player's year either. So variance is it's a weird one for sure because these are either performances you need to really look at it from a quantifiable aspect. You want to look at them, from a numbers perspective, but they are humans. So we all want to believe that, a guy's just going off and every once in a while, sure, but schedules and, those type of things, the nerdy part of it kind of brings you back down to reality if you really dig into the numbers. So moving on from that point, third point is blowing it up early, blowing your team up early, moving certain parts early. And this is something actually that kind of goes against the grain of a lot of what you might hear on YouTube. I bet you if you wanted to look up top 5 things not to do as a manager, top 5 things dumb managers do in fantasy, you're always going to see managers that panic, managers that are selling their players early, selling their picks early. I would say be risky sometimes. Sometimes it's not it. Okay. Sometimes you have a bad draft and you shouldn't let it just ruin your season. Okay. I always just have a mental roll my eye when I hear some people say, like, yeah, dude, my guy got injured. Okay, injuries are one thing, but we're playing in a 14-week season here. And by the time teams are 100% eliminated, sometimes not until like week 10. Okay, sometimes even later if you're like a 500 team. After 3 weeks, sometimes you should know. If you're watching the games, you can tell that a player is out of it. And it's better to sell at 80% what the value was when you drafted him instead of just waiting. And then now there's no value. And now you're just stuck with this player. There's been players like this in the past. Last year, I feel like Alejandro with Calvin Ridley. I really feel like he could have gotten out of him early on, chose not to. Didn't 100% burn him, but I know for a fact like Stawara, I think he was a big fan of Ridley. I think week 3, week 4, if Alejandro would have gotten rid of him, he could have gotten pretty similar value to what he drafted him for. And then another player, this is actually kind of goes back, is Jacob with Antonio Gibson. I remember Alejandro and I wanting Antonio Gibson for weeks, I think. And, now that one's a tough one because I'm pretty sure that was his first or second round pick. But the guy clearly wasn't doing well, really bad. And we were, offering 2-for-1 deals. And now that one's a more tougher example because obviously it's an earlier pick. But sometimes getting out early, it's some years it might screw you. But the odds that your team is terrible early on and that it's going to turn around and make a miraculous comeback, that's way less likely than your players are bad and they were already like sus picks or like sleeper or risky picks, and for them to and they just stay bad. Like that's honestly more likely. They might get improved slightly, but not to the point where you're gonna regain value. An example that I have is like 2 years ago, I had Russell Wilson and Courtland Sutton. I was all in on that connection. 1, 2, I think 3 weeks in, I had seen enough. The camp reports about what the coaches were saying, some of the plays, the connection. I was like, this is not what I drafted. And I need to get out because I drafted Courtland Sutton in like the 5th round, and he's not. He might not be wide receiver 40, but he's not going to be like this wide receiver 10 like I thought he might be. So I'm going to get out. And I'm pretty sure by week 6, I was off both those players. Now, I still had Gabe Davis. So this is proof that, you might shoot for the sky, shoot for the moon and fall amongst the stars here. Like I still got stuck with Gabe Davis. Nobody wanted him all year. But at least I got out of Courtland Sutton and Russell Wilson and turned my season around and won the league. Had I stuck with those players because of my ego or just, hard-headedness or really just too lazy to try and interact with others and trade. Oh man, that season, I think that's not a playoff team for sure. So blowing it up early every once in a while, like just try and trust your gut. Like if if you have a bad draft, it's okay. Just it's going to take a little bit more work, and maybe sometimes that's why people don't want to do it. Is it can be a lot of work, like talking to people and making trades and trying to dish and hunting on the waiver wire. But sometimes just go for it. Why not? You're first or last. So next point is knowing your league. This is not knowing your league mates in the draft. This is more so trying to keep up to date with defense, injuries, how other people's players are doing. This is the kind of thing where if you do it just a little bit each week, it's really nothing. You're barely going to notice it. Do it while you're checking scores, do it right before you set your lineup, and you'll have a good grasp on how the league and just how the NFL season is going, rather than it being like week 8 and all you've really done is, you look at the waivers, right? You check your lineup, you set your lineup, the basics, but you don't know which defense, you don't know, like you want to check your playoff schedule. Is your playoff schedule going to be good? You're trying to buy low on another player and you have all you're looking at through all you can look at is box scores because you haven't watched any of the games and you don't know was this a fluky game, this 30-point game that he had, or can this player pull it up, repeat that, yada yada. So these type of things, again, keep up with it, just little things here and there. It's not like half an hour. Like literally you can just check like a start sit week 6 on like ESPN or whatever. You may not get any info about your players, but guess what? You found out that this one defense that was trash week 1, now they've been the best run, like a top 5 run defense the last 2-3 weeks. Just keep that in mind. Boom, I have a mental note. And then, next time, let's say you're going to start and face this defense, you have that little mental note. Oh, I remember reading about that. Let me go double check, see how they've been doing recently. That's really how you learn. It's not, a lot of my knowledge has just been that type of stuff. It has not just been sitting down and just crunching numbers, preseason sometimes, but not during the season. It's really just, you hear a couple points, you hear about an injury, just check a team's injury list. And if you don't know a player, Google the player. If he's a good player, if he's important, chances are some beat writer for that team has made a comment about how this player missing this amount of time is going to be devastating for the run defense. And these little things help your start and sits, help your flexes, help your decision, especially if we do fab this year. How much should I invest on this waiver player? How to value playoff schedules. And I'm a big playoff schedule guy. After like week 6, week 7, I'm not trading for players if they have bad playoff schedules. That's how big I'm into that. And so those type of things where it's daunting if it's week 10 and now you got to learn about all these defenses. Yeah, that's not fun. Even as someone who likes football, like that's just not fun. And you're not gonna, it's not as useful as if you try to learn that knowledge just a little bit throughout the season. I'm not trying to sit here and say watch more games. I feel like that's the number one way to improve your fantasy football skills, but knowing schedules, injuries, the small fluctuations throughout the league, as well as knowing on another person's team, can help you trade. And if a player, if you've noticed that this guy all year, he's been struggling with running backs, why don't you let him know every once in a while? Then when you have a running back, maybe you can sell, he'll be subconsciously thinking about all his bad running backs that you've been telling him about. So little stuff like that. The last thing, this is kind of to wrap it all up, because I feel like a lot of you guys suffer with this. It's risking it for the biscuit. If you're not first, you're last. All right. Whether it's a lineup decision, whether it's a trade, whether it's a late round pick, whether it's no, I guess those are the three big things for risking it. When you combine all these things, the variance, blowing it up early, knowing your league, risking it, whatever, it helps you be more honest with yourself. If it's week 7, sure, there's a lot of the season left, okay? But if you're keeping up with defenses and you're keeping up with injuries on other teams and all these things, you should know if you're a contender, if you're a top 2 team, or you're one of these 50-50 guys. In my personal opinion, every year, there's really only 2 to 3, maybe sometimes 1. It's most of the time 2 to 3 teams that are legit contenders. Like they should be mad if they lose, like seriously mad. Like this was one of their years. And then a bunch of guys where it's like, it all has to go right. And going with the go right and like kind of this risking it / like hustling. I'm a big fan of Josh's season last year. Josh is, had a history of a lot of injuries slash just had drafts. And last year he did a little bit of everything that really turned his season around. Had the number one pick. He was out for over half the season. He said, you know what? I'm not going to sell. I think I have enough talent on the team, which he did. Okay. He was struggling with running back. Now, this may not have been his thought process, but when he did the Jahmyr Gibbs for Jalen Waddle, he got rid of Jalen Waddle and moved on to Jahmyr Gibbs. I remember at the time, I don't know about everybody else, but I was like, I don't really get this trade. David Montgomery is coming back from injury, and Jalen Waddle is coming back from injury too. So, how does this help and either of them? But at the end of the day, maybe Josh was just like, my running backs suck. I'm not going to win with just these guys. Maybe Jahmyr Gibbs he was taken in the top, 12 picks. Maybe now that he showed all this stuff, he's going to get more work, even with Montgomery back. And with Jalen Waddle, all the injuries he's getting, maybe it's just not his year. And you know what? What do I have to lose? I'm not projected to make the playoffs. I'm just going to go for it. Meanwhile, he's picking up, Miles Sanders for him, complete bust. Scoops up Schubert Hubbard. Okay. The simple things that you think everybody's picking up their handcuffs. They're not. Let me tell you. As nerdy as I am, I'm checking this stuff. People don't always pick up those kind of guys. And Chuba Hubbard ended up being a great pickup for him. So little things like that, little hustles, just making trades that you're like, I don't know about that. Okay. It can really turn your season around. I feel like everybody, for the most part, has good pieces, has championship pieces. And you don't want to be a guy that just every year is just like, well, we'll just let it fall the way it is. Because you're going to have years where you draft terribly and you don't find a waiver hero or whatever. It doesn't matter how good a fantasy, how much football you watch. If you don't do anything about it, your team's going to be bad. And I think that's how, when I look at some people in the league, why they'll have like top 3 finishes and then they'll be bottom 3 and then they'll win the league one year and then they'll be like 8th. It's because instead of they kind of just ride out with their team. And I think you're not really playing the game there. You're just, that's a different kind of risk. That's like you get all this information throughout the year. And I feel like you just kind of choose to ignore it. Like you got all this, you drafted your players. Okay. You like your players. You're finding out all this stuff about defense, about how the offense is working, touches, targets, whatever. And you're just like, nah, I don't want to get screwed in a trade. So I'm just going to sit on this, sometimes good, sometimes bad team for 14 weeks as everyone else tries to go for it. So yeah, that's it for me tonight. I felt like I was getting a little rambly there. I'll get this edited for you guys. I might make another video. I feel like I made some good points in this one, and I feel like, obviously if I make these too long, you guys won't fully listen, but maybe play this in the car on a long drive. Hope to see you guys soon. You guys all take care. Have a good night. Peace out.